Hey, what's up, everybody? How's it going? Welcome back to the stream. This is Tuesday, once again. Did you know that? Did you know, chat? Today is another instance of that second day of the week, the glorious second day that we call Tuesday, and it's time to talk about some Warhammer 40,000. So, yeah, that'll be sweet. We got some stuff to talk about. Nephilim changes. I know that's been kind of the talk of the town this week. I put out 2 videos about it already, which is pretty exciting. One I just put out earlier this morning. It's a little short, just talking about the core rules changes, and I did all my thoughts about them. Yeah, that went live yesterday, and I was pretty happy with how that video came out. So yeah, I mean that's what's going on. I played a tournament this weekend, which was kind of sick. We can talk about that. And what is this photo that I have up? This isn't the beginning of the tournament at all. What have I done? Are these out of order? Maybe. Uh-oh. Interesting. All right, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And we can talk about tournaments from this past week. Although, to be fair, the tournament discussion for this past weekend is a little bit sort of clouded by the fact that we have all the Nephilim changes now. So we know that we're going to talk about some lists that aren't going to be legal within 7 days, which is a little bit weird and strange, but, you know, it is what it is. I think as a venture in gaming archaeology, it might still be interesting to continue to talk about them, because I think there are some really interesting and cool list archetypes that are coming out, especially now that Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights have started to sort of take to the scene and become more widely played. As you can see in this game too, I played a bunch of Chaos against a bunch of Knights this weekend, and as they fit into other sub-factions pretty well because they have the Agents of the Imperium and Chaos special abilities where they don't break sub-faction abilities. If you take a single super heavy of them, then that's pretty cool. So definitely some interesting stuff to talk about there, but obviously I think it's going to be a little bit overshadowed by Nephilim, but that's okay. This is we have probably this week and next week are going to be sort of the last gasps of Warzone Nachmund season, and from there on out we're going to be starting to use the new rule set, which is going to be obviously very different. Speaking of that, I do have planned on the docket to stream a grand tournament this weekend that's local to me. That's the Webway Games Grand Tournament. They're looking to run a regular series of them, of 32-person events, and this is going to be the first one, so hopefully it goes well. And I am scheduled to go stream that, so if you are on the Twitch channel, not the YouTube, you can go check that out. Also, youtube.com/TacticalTortoisetv is where all the VODs from that go, and you can see all the VODs from our previous GT coverage. We have some pretty good VODs, I think, from GT games over the last couple weeks, and I've been happy with how those are coming out, so go check them out. Yeah. Anyway, how's it going, chat? Hope everyone had a good time chilling this weekend. Hope everybody played some games and hung out and stuff. Apocalypse Plant. Have I tried the new Nephilim changes? Is the sky falling like Reddit is saying it is? Here's a free piece of advice I'll give you. No charge whatsoever. Just don't go on Reddit or listen to anything Reddit says, because it will make your life both easier, more intelligent, and generally more fulfilling, I think, in my opinion. So that's a free run. That's a freebie you get right there, chat. Just forget about Reddit. Don't even ever think about them ever again. Give us points or give us death. Yeah, for sure. I'm with you there. I know there's been some points leaks, quote unquote leaks, talking about the points changes, but I don't know how much I trust them at this stage, because this is kind of an unprecedented release, because it's the first time they're releasing the points fully digitally, not in a book. So most often I imagine that we get leaks. We get leaks from people who have the documents ahead of time, and usually those come in the form of screenshots. And sometimes you also get leaks from stores or distribution centers that get them early to ship them out, and then they crack a case and they'll leak from there. And that's not going to be the case with the points right now. So the points leaks we've gotten so far are kind of up in the air, but we'll know by Saturday. Really, I'm hoping we see some big cuts for Space Marines for sure. Basic Space Marine infantry and stuff is wildly overcosted right now. It needs to get cut. Obviously, I'm hoping the 8th edition codexes get some love, although I do see some people really upset about them right now, and I think, honestly, like, the game has evolved so far past the 8th edition codexes. I think you're probably better off just just waiting to get a new codex for those. So, you know, there it is. A little bit funny. Fact check, is it the second day of the week or third? That's a good question, Nergomat in chat, by the way. Nergomat, how's it going? Thanks for coming and joining me. That's a really good one because I live in a constant state of hangover, so I never know what day it is. I set an alarm for 4 p.m. every day, and I guess which one is Tuesday, and that's when I go live with this. And so far, I've had it mostly correct, but with the occasional snafu, and today I'm hoping it's correct. I guess my computer could tell me what day it is. It says it's Tuesday, but I also, you know, the computer's clock might be wrong. So literally no one knows what day it is. And really, what are days? They're a construct of, you know, human society, and they mean nothing. So anyway, I played a tournament this weekend. We can talk about that first, I guess. Yeah. What is time? What are humans? I did just remember that I forgot to put my list in the video description chat for my games today. Let me throw them in there real quick. This list I have saved for mine is, I think, wrong. Is this incorrect? No? Okay, weird. All right. Oh, it's just formatted badly. All right, we'll just throw this one in there. Chats, I apologize for the delay. Just so everybody gets a good look at my list. I know some people are, it's gonna be a question if I don't give you all the document. Cool. All right, everybody in chat, here's my list. Boop, boop. I'll throw that in the video description too. Nice. All right, cool. So I played a tournament. I'm going to explore my gallery here a little bit because for some reason it looks like the first couple of photos have been cut off. I don't know what that's about. This is about midway through game 3, or game 1, excuse me. So I'm going to try to find my first picture so I can give that to you. All right. There we go. That should be better. Cool. All right. So I played a tournament this weekend, and I ended up taking my Kraken list that I've been playing for the last couple of weeks. I feel it's pretty good, although I am starting to feel the age a little bit. I sometimes I get like really invested in a list, and I get very excited about it, and then I play it in like to death. And the meta kind of moves away from me, and then I'm still playing this list. It's like a little bit old. And the games this weekend were a little tough. And I think that's sort of symptomatic of that. So that wasn't too shocking to me. We'll certainly need to update the list for Warzone Nephilim. And I don't know exactly what changes, but I'll probably stick with High Fleet Kraken because I think it's the best High Fleet. That's my controversial opinion today. Land Raider Leagues coming in with Toughness 9 Land Raiders. Hell yeah. Toughness 9 and D6 plus 2 damage last cannons. That's pretty wild. I think if the Chaos Space Marine, or if Land Raiders like all get that buff and their points don't really change, they might be okay. Although I'm a little worried about I mean, it's the same problem that 40k has always had with like big vehicles that stand in the open. Is that they're just so easy to kill. But a Land Raider, if they all go to T9, like they have smoke screen built in, so they're probably -1 to be hit. They have Armor of Contempt on a 2+ save, which is like a good place to stand. So like they might be okay, maybe. Especially if you can source an Inbalm, but I don't know if there are any vehicle-specific Inbalms anymore. But yeah, I think because Fiero's lost his, the Aurelian Shroud is only core now, and everything else you need like Psychic Fortress or whatever, you need to spend Psychic Power on, so you can't do it turn 1. So I don't think you can source an invuln save for them, but I'm happy to be proven wrong. I'm sure there's one in there somewhere that I forgot. So anyway, the list I was playing, for those who didn't hear the last time I talked about it, but it's been a while since I played in a tournament, so I don't know if I've talked about it in a little bit, is basically focused entirely on the multi-wound infantry. So the whole game plan, because we're in an age right now where it's very difficult to have your unit stand out in the front of your opponent's army and have them not immediately be dead, because we're fighting against things like Hail of Doom Aldari. We can see some Imperial Knights here, and Imperial Knights hit like absolute Mac trucks, so they basically should kill everything that they shoot at. And it's kind of a no-win scenario if your game plan is to have your models be in line of sight of your opponent. So the whole point was to have a bunch of models that can go through walls and are very fast, so that they can actually trade with opponents before they get shot to death. So to that end, we have 2 big warrior bricks, 6-man warrior bricks with venom cannons and adrenal glands, 3 big ravener bricks, so 5 raveners apiece, and then basically a ton of utility units. There's 2 3-man warrior squads, one gargoyle squad, a gene stealer squad, and then the support stuff, so zone thropes, venom thropes. There's a pyrivore in there. We had Deathleaper to add more obsac, and then the characters. So I have a Tyranid Prime. Mostly, I mean, the essentially big wombo combo is that we can put +1 to hit on a unit from direct guidance, which is the warlord trait I give the Tyranid Prime. He can give reroll 1s to hit to a unit, or he gives reroll 1s to wound to a unit. There's a Winged Hive Tyrant. He gives reroll 1s to hit to a unit, and you just sync them all on one unit. You pump that unit up with the +8-inch advance from High Fleet Kraken. You make them advance and charge, and they go blow something up. And then you call it a day. You trade like a 200-point unit for hopefully something worth more than 200 points. As well as an objective or whatever, and then you just do that repeatedly until the game's over. That's mostly the game plan, and so far it works pretty well, so I'm pretty happy with it. We also have the Neurothrope in there with Resonance Barb, so it's +2 to cast instead of +1, and Synaptic Tendrils. That's mostly to give Warp Siphon to the Hive Tyrant to trigger Warpcraft secondaries, so that the Hive Tyrant can be doing Warpcraft stuff without being able to be mucked with too hard. Because especially if you're doing something like Warp Ritual, where if you get denied once or twice, it's not the end of the world. The chances of your opponent denying you with multiple times with Warp Siphon up, unless they have a bonus to deny, are pretty low. So even if they can deny like a Psychic Interrogation or something, you're not that worried about it. If you're rolling so many big dice on those. Thoughts on 10-point Necron Warriors? Might be okay. I think the scariest stuff in Necron tends to be like the faster units, but 10-point Necron Warriors is pretty good. Those things are hard to kill once all the buffs are down, so it doesn't seem too bad. Artemis Steve had an 18-man RTT in Mexico City. That's awesome. Congratulations. Lost game 3 on the final table. That's too bad. What was the matchup, Artemis Steve? Inquiring minds want to know. So I've been pretty happy with this list so far. It is pretty good. Basically, like, you know, you're trading one big brick into something, the rest of your army setting up to continue to play that peace trade game, and then the Hive Tyrant usually just gets to kill something in the middle of the table and run away every turn. And you can follow up behind him with the faster utility units like the Gene Stealers and the Gargoyles, and they can hold that middle objective for a turn while he gets out of dodge. And usually you just play that until your opponent's out of stuff. And the Hive Tyrant and the support stuff kind of dominates the late game. Round 1 of this tournament. So we were playing GT Nachmund. Obviously, the Nephilim stuff hadn't come out yet. And I got paired against Imperial Knights, who I, to be honest, have never played against before. They updated Imperial Knights Codex. I only played against Chaos Knights several times. And I was kind of unprepared for Imperial Knights, to be fair. So my opponent, I think I'm going to pull up my opponent's list because it was super cool. And it had a lot of very interesting combos in it. Give me one moment here, chat. Boop, boop, boop. So my opponent was Dylan. He was playing House Tyrannus, so everything was had a bumped wounds, or excuse me, everything had a 6+ damage ignore. And then he had a Crusader and a Paladin. The Crusader had Endless Fury, and blessed by the sacristans. So a extended range on all the range weapons, and his 6s to wound inflicted mortal wounds on top. So the wombo combo there was that he had Master Tactician upgraded on that Crusader, so he could at least once per game spend for calculated trajectory, I think, or calculated targeting, the stratagem where a 6 to wound automatically converts all of the damage of the weapon into mortal wounds. So he could do that on top of the mortal wound from blessed by the sacristans, and basically be inflicting, damage +1 mortal wound on wound rolls of 6, and fire the maximum number of attacks at me in order to try to generate as many of those mortal wounds as possible. And while it doesn't feel like, we're not doing the whole wombo combo, or we're trying to eke out the laser destroyer auto 6 conversion into mortal wounds, which is, I think, a little bit tough to pull off in its entirety. The game plan was essentially just to fire as many times with this Crusader and just fish for 6s as much as possible. And you don't really need that many 6s to convert, especially if you're firing its battle cannon, in order to be able to put enough mortal wounds through for that guy to kill something. So basically, he was essentially anything that he targeted just died. Was effectively how that Crusader typically went. He also had a Knight Paladin, that one with Ion Billwork to give it the 4+ invulnerable save, and a bunch of armigers. There were 3 Helverins and 3 Warglaves, so 6 total armigers. We were on conversion this game, so 5 objectives in the big cross in the middle of the table. The objectives were locking for objective secured, I believe. And, yeah, that was what's going on. So I ended up, when I got to the table, I was immediately a little bit concerned because the amount of line of sight blocking on this terrain was pretty abysmal. It was certainly less than I'm typically used to. Basically, I had this little obstruction right here, which is basically a field, a crate. And gave me a little bit of line of sight blocking, especially against the armigers that weren't quite as tall. So I could block basically this line. This is the Tyranid Prime, so he was untargetable. The Hive Tyrant was untargetable. I had Death Leaper out in the open because she's untargetable if she's touching terrain, which she was. And I could hide a lot of my army behind this, and I had a little bit of leeway behind this thing. But that was about it. So basically I had this area, and this area to hide behind, which is probably maybe 12 inches of total table space to actually hide my army behind, which is not great against an army that can alpha strike as hard as knights can. So I ended up basically placing all my stuff super conservatively. My game plan initially was basically to push towards this objective because that was the only way. This is the only place I had good terrain to actually hide behind. I'm usually used to a ruin being a little bit more centrally located, so I can push to these 2 objectives. But I didn't have any of that, so the game plan was originally to go that way. I ended up going first, which is kind of nice, so I could actually maneuver before my stuff got killed. I put a bunch of defensive buffs on the gargoyles over here in the off chance that they ended up surviving. I even spent a CP to project the Venomthrope aura out so it could hit them. The Venomthropes are in behind this building here. You can't quite see them. I guess we could shuffle the viewer over a little bit. Ooh. Maybe that is fine, I guess. There it is. And then the rest of my stuff had to basically push up to try to score that objective in the future. I put my Pyrovore right in the front with the intention of it growing up and getting Stranglehold on turn 1. I took Stranglehold, I took Warp Ritual, because the game plan generally is to get the Hive Tyrant in the middle of the table. My opponent has to push Helverins into the middle of the table to fight, to control the center. So the game plan was to put the Hive Tyrant up there, complete the ritual, kill a Helverin and run away, or kill an Armiger, excuse me, and then run away. And I took Bring It Down, obviously, because that's a relatively easy max against varieties of knights. But essentially, I think I ended up failing the advance roll to get the Pyrovore onto the middle objective, so I ended up putting the Gene Stealers there instead, just to score it. I didn't even pick an Imperative on turn 1, because Or I might have picked Zoanthrope to get the invuln save on this stuff. But I wasn't even that worried about it because the amount that my opponent was going to be able to attack was so minuscule that I wasn't like super concerned. The downside though is that all my stuff was so far back that I was going to have a tough time like playing aggressively from keeping things so safe. But I think if I just push all my stuff out in the open, I think I lose too many dudes and I don't end up having the ability to fight all of the armigers, especially since they're essentially natively -1 damage because of their bondsman abilities. So as soon as the bondsman abilities, which are the targeted command phase buffs from the big knights, become active on the little knights, they get a duty eternal effect on them, so they're -1 damage. So all of my like warriors and stuff were basically half damage against them, which was going to make things a little bit awkward, especially on top of that 6+ damage ignore that the House Tyrannus gives them. So here's a picture of my, I think this is after my first turn. I moved some stuff around, tried to keep things as out of line of sight as possible, and basically just said go. My opponent played relatively cagey. He put he took a knight-specific secondary that gives him an action he can perform within 6 inches of the center of the table. He put one armiger in the middle of the table, but the other one, because it had to walk to perform the action, was actually slightly off this objective. So it didn't end up being able to get wholly on that objective. He killed 4 out of the 5 Gene Stealers, and the last Gene Stealer auto-passed it, or Insane Bravery in his morale check, because he was out of Synapse, which was pretty sick. So he ended up just going and grabbing this. But my opponent killed one of my warrior blobs that were over here, my little 3-mans, as well as all of the gargoyles, which is a little bit sad about, even through my -1 to hit. But, I mean, two Halverins will probably do that. It is a ton of shooting from those guys. He also got the 2 Helverins over here fired into my warrior brick that was over here, and ended up killing 3 of them, which is a little bit sad. So in response, I ended up trying to force my opponent down to... I got knocked down to a 4-point primary because my opponent was able to kill all my stuff on this objective and kill all my stuff in the middle objective, so I only had my home objective. Felt like I needed to force my opponent themselves down to a 4-point primary. So I supercharged one of my Ravener units that was hiding back here, and they got the big advance, and we used this warrior squad to bounce our psychic powers over them to give them advance and charge. And the game plan was, I picked Neurothrope Imperative, or Tyranid Prime Imperative this turn, excuse me, to get the exploding 6s to hit with all my ranged attacks. The game plan was to just burn that dude down with shooting and then finish him off with the charge. But, unfortunately, between the 6+ damage ignore, the -1 damage for all my Venom Cannons, and just the sort of lines of sight being a little bit awkward shooting back at my opponent, I wasn't actually able to do that much damage. So this Ravener squad ended up going in, but not killing the Armiger. So my opponent was already up 4 points right there. I did kill the Armiger that was holding the middle with the Hive Tyrant, and I completed my War Patrol, and he ran away, which was very exciting. Good stuff. And basically passed turn and said go. So from there, my opponent and I was feeling a little bit worried because I killed 1 Armiger. I put all of my shooting down, and I didn't kill a single Armiger with shooting, even with all of my exploding 6s and all the buffs that I had. So I was feeling a little bit worried at that stage about how the game was going to go. But fortunately, my follow-up turn was pretty good. My opponent killed all of the Raveners back here, but they were catalysted, and they took a little bit of extra damage, or a little bit of extra work to take out. And I lost, I think, not too much on the opposite side. I think I lost a few out of my 3 models, I believe, out of my warrior brick that was down here that had red on them. Let's see if... not entirely sure where they went. Oh, they're just sticking out here. Yeah, so I lost 3 members of that unit, and I lost this entire Ravener squad. And I lost most of another Ravener squad. But it wasn't like the end of the world. But I was feeling a little bit down on attrition. So I ended up basically making the decision to pop my Warrior Imperative and just like go full face with everything and hope for the best. And fortunately, it worked out pretty well. What I was able to do was I think I killed the Armiger over here. It had fallen back, I believe, to allow my opponent to shoot the Raveners that were over here. The depleted second Ravener squad were able to go in and kill that. I killed another second Armiger in the center with the Hive Tyrant. And then I was able to get with a shard lure from one of my warrior squads back here, I was able to get another Ravener unit into a Helverin in the top right. And between all the shooting and all the melee from those guys, they were able to kill the Helverin. I was able to kill the 2 armigers in the center, and I used a 8-inch advance to get a warrior squad onto this objective. And because my opponent's big knights weren't objective secured, only the Helverins were, I was actually able to steal that objective away from them to put them down to a 4-point primary. So I was feeling pretty good. My first turn was pretty bad. I only killed, I killed 1 model and lost a bunch of units for it. But my second turn, I was able to clear out a full 4 armigers, which felt like I was coming right back around. Now, generally speaking, what I found is that in my games against Chaos Knights, if I can clip out all the armigers, my opponent kind of loses the ability to hold objectives realistically. So I was feeling like I was doing pretty okay at this stage. Now my opponent basically continued to just stomp around. He got the armiger, or the Helverin over here, and took his objective back from that. The Paladin went around and tried to get onto the center objective, wasn't able to do so. So my opponent started losing points on Stranglehold. And this armiger ended up just towing this objective, I believe, to contest it. But at this stage, they were out of, at least this armiger was out of range to get the Bondsman effect, so it was not -1 damage anymore. That said, the Crusader in the back was still sort of doing the Emperor's work in just removing entire units from the table. So he was basically able to clean out this whole objective from me, which was a little bit upsetting. I didn't take a picture of the final game state, but what I ended up basically doing was putting the 2 warrior bricks and the Pyrovore, which is somehow still alive, into the Helverin that was up here in the top right-hand side, or the top left-hand side, excuse me, to kill it. So they killed it and cleared the objective, which was good. I had the... I basically just started pushing the rest of my army up into the center, and I believe I still had a model here that could tow this objective in order to take it away from my opponent and get me a stranglehold. What my opponent ended up basically trying to do was firing the Crusader into everything, basically split firing into everything on the objective up here and trying to clip it all out. And I had catalysted one of my 3-man warrior squads over there. Unfortunately, one of my warrior squads was placed such just because of piling consolidations, where its wounded models were on the objective. So as soon as it took damage, it would be pulled off the objective. So my opponent had to kill 1 warrior out of 1 unit, on another entire warrior squad that was catalysted, and then also the Pyrovore to clear me off that objective. He ended up killing the 1 warrior out of the first unit he needed, as well as almost exactly killing the second warrior squad, but he had a Storm Spear rocket pod shot to try to shoot the Pyrovore and ended up flubbing in. So the Pyrovore survived and held me down in that objective, which is a pretty big deal. At this stage, because my opponent was doing such a good job at killing my army, he had killed all but 1 of my warriors at that point, and I believe all of the Raveners as well. He was pretty ahead on no prisoners, which everyone takes against this army because it's really good. That's the one downside of this army. I was on track to max my Warp Ritual, which was fine, but my Bring It Down hadn't been too good because I had only basically killed the armigers. Now, he had put the Paladin in the center of the table, and in order to try to hold down that objective for his bottom round 5 turn. And essentially, in order to win and bring my Bring It Down score basically back to meet my opponent's no prisoner score, I had to kill the Paladin. So he went to the middle of the table, stomped on some stuff. He had taken a little bit of damage from smites and random shooting earlier, but it wasn't too much damage because they have that 6+ damage ignore. And I was basically like, all right, well, here we go. So I charged 1 warrior in from 1 squad. I charged the Death Leaper in. I had 3 Venom Thropes that plinked him with the no Fight Last aura, so he couldn't interrupt. And then hit him with the Hive Tyrant, who's this guy right here, being a proxy base because he's got big wings and is annoying to place, as well as all 3 Tyrant Guard. And I ended up rolling out all of my little attacks first and doing not a lot of damage. I think I had done between the 16 or 18. There's 18 attacks off of the Tyrant Guard, 15 attacks off of the the Venom Thropes, and then the 11 2-damage attacks off of the Warrior and Death Leaper. I had done, I think, 6 damage, which is a little bit sad. But he was wounded enough to get brought down to, I believe, only 9. So I needed to convert 3 attacks through with the Hive Tyrant and have him make no 6+ damage ignores. He did have the trait for 4+ invulnerable save in melee, which is why he wasn't taking as much damage as you would expect. So he's taking a 4+ into a 6+ damage ignore. So this dude's pretty tanky. So the Hive Tyrant went in. I paid the CP for Adrenal Surge for additional attacks. I got 3 extra attacks, and he had maxed his Maw Claws already. So he was swinging 10 times with the Monstrous Bone Sword. Or is that right? No, maybe he only rolled a 1. Because he had 10 attacks. Maybe he had 11. Because he was at 9. I think it was 11 attacks. And 1 failed to convert. I think I missed 1 off of the wound roll. So hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s because of the Lash Whip, and then wounding on 3s because of Strength 11, with full rerolls because of Maw Claws with Thyrax. And I converted 10 attacks. I was like, this seems pretty good. Basically, I need like 4-ish to go through against the 4+ invulnerable save, and then he can make 1 or 2 damage ignores, and we still get him. Plus, we have like the 2 attacks off the Tyrant Claws to finish him off if we need to. So this feels pretty good, and my opponent just straight up rolled all 10 invulnerable saves and took no damage from the Hive Tyrant. From there, it was basically just my opponent's bottom round 5 to try to clear me. He ended up putting attacks into the Death Leaper and failing to kill her. So she ended up obsecking the objective away from him and basically preventing him from taking it back. So my opponent ended up not being able to score that objective for primaries at the end. But because I think he was still able to get a 4 and tie me on primaries, it basically came down to the no prisoners versus the bring it down. And because the paladin hadn't died, I lost by 1 point on bring it down, and ended up losing the game. So I was like, that's sad. That's pretty unfortunate. But I think ultimately, I couldn't have been too upset with how I played because I think mathematically, were we to play that game out 10 times, I think that that result goes in my favor a lot more often. Obviously, there were other things that could go my way. The Crusader not killing my units over on this objective was kind of a big swing too. But it just means I think that it was a really good game because it came down to such a close dice roll at the end. Now, I wasn't entirely sure if my game plan of playing like Super KG was correct. I almost wonder, in hindsight, whether or not it would have been better to just push my dudes and declare Zoanthrope Aura Imperative turn 1, so we get the 4+ invulnerable save, or the 5+ invulnerable save, excuse me, and then just run everything into the middle of my opponent, into the middle of the table to like basically flip on the Warrior Imperative and just like slam into him round 2. And I wonder, I kind of would like to like replay this matchup because I wonder if that would have gone well. My opponent still had attacks with a lot of his units, but not his largest knights, not the 2 big knights. I made sure that they could basically only attack the Gene Stealers. So he was able to fire with, I think, all 3 Helverins, because some of them could fire into this stuff over here that I didn't really care about. And then 1 Helverin and 1 Warglaive could go over here and fire down this lane, but nothing else had shots. So I blanked both big knights and 2 Warglaives from being able to attack me. And I wonder if the extra damage I would have taken from the big knights shooting plus the other 2 armatures, if I had declared a 5+ invulnerable save, would have put me in a better spot just positionally, because I ended up having some trouble like being able to assign enough damage to the armatures to actually kill them and take my opponent's objectives. But I have a sneaking suspicion that I would have lost too much, I think. And really, it was just like, I didn't have a great terrain layout. To be fair, it also wasn't great for my opponent, because these were ruled as forests that were 3 inches tall so that they could provide dense cover. which meant that the big knights were also slowed down by them. So we had two armies that wanted to get relatively close to each other. My opponent obviously was much better at shooting at long ranges because he has all the armatures and stuff. But both of our relatively close combat armies were going to be slowed down by this like awkward terrain here. I just would have liked, I think, to have this building here instead of where it was, because and my opponent and I had both mentioned that it almost felt like this layout was supposed to go the other way, and just, I don't know, got a bad mission or whatever, because these buildings were not super relevant. And in this space, what they would have done is given me a place I could actually stage and then get into my opponent's objectives. But I didn't really have that. So I was kind of fighting. I was kind of trying to reach as far as I could to get at them, which didn't end up working out, but probably would have if I hadn't basically done nothing on my last turn and given my opponent a big, huge thing. So anyway, that was pretty wild. Twin Tom, you can use a proxy base for big models. Yeah, if it base measures, the only thing that matters for measurement, it's different if you're trying to measure line of sight. But the only thing that measures for positional purposes is the actual base itself. So if you're in a position like this where you know I could place this Hive Tyrant here, it would just take me like fucking ages to actually position my whole army like underneath its wings. So in order to save everyone like massive amounts of time and headache, you end up just using a proxy base. It also helps for like pre-planning. Like you can see here, this is where the Hive Tyrant was standing in this situation too, because I had a bunch of guns and arms and stuff that were overhanging its base. And if I was going to try to place the Hive Tyrant down and like interweave it between all of everyone's like guns, it would have taken ages. So I ended up basically just, what I typically do is when I'm planning out the charge for the Hive Tyrant, I plan out its final position after it overruns, and I basically just tell my opponent that this is where, if everything goes well, this is where he's going to be at the end of the turn, and make sure that like between consolidates and pylons and stuff, he can get back to that position. And then after he goes and he makes his attacks, and then I just pull him off, and I'm like, all right, he's going to be over here somewhere. But yeah, generally speaking, you can do that, and it helps a ton. I actually I streamed a knight player who did a really smart thing. He was playing an armature spam knight list where he took, I think, one big knight. He took a valiant, and then the rest of his list was like 10 armatures. And he literally just didn't glue any of them to their bases. He just had them on top of the base. And then anytime there was a measurement or a positioning thing, or he needed to just like pre-measure movement, he literally would just take the model away and then use the base as the true positioning of the unit, and that's a very clean play, which I think I like a lot. I really appreciate good clean play like that. So anyway, that was my first round of the tournament, so a little disappointing. At the end of the day, there's not too much you can do about dice rolls like that, but I was hoping to be able to get out of round one, but unfortunately it was not to be. And now having experienced the power that is Imperial Knights, I actually think this Codex is like really good. I know there was some sort of maybe concern about its power level. It doesn't feel like it's not like, it's certainly not Tyranid's level, I think, generally speaking. Although it definitely has the tools to play against them, as evidenced by the fact that it did very well. But I do think that there's like a ton of really strong stuff in there. I think the armatures are really good. Being able to give them -1 damage on top of the 6+ damage ignore makes them super difficult to shift. And I think the ranged output of the army, as is to be expected from a knight army, is phenomenal. I was sort of unprepared for the level of resilience because I'm so used to the Chaos Knights, which kind of just fall over. The Chaos Knights tend to, I don't even know if they hit that much harder. The Chaos Knights just feel more impotent, I guess, from the Imperial Knights. And I don't know if that's everyone's experience, but I guess they're trixier. Like, they have the dread abilities and stuff like that, but the Imperial Knights are just like, raw stats doing great for them. So it was an interesting experience. It was good to rip that Imperial Knight Band-Aid right off. But that put me into round 2. I was up against Thousand Suns. They were bringing Magnus. There he is in his winged glory over here. Big old Magnus the Red himself, who I had never played against in 9th edition, so I wasn't entirely sure how this game was going to go. But it turns out I was kind of unprepared for for the level to which they had gutted his datasheet in the updated codex, because so many abilities I was expecting Magnus to be able to like come out at me with, you know, like being able to temporal surge, like double move himself around the table, which he can no longer do. He shrugged mortal wounds on a 2+, I think, in his previous version, which he no longer does. He's just a dude. He was just a big dopey dude, and it was a little disappointing. Poor Magnus. We were on secure missing artifacts, so that we moved each other's objectives around. So we basically each pulled these objectives out of their safe zones behind the buildings so that they were out in the open. And then my opponent actually moved his home objective forward, so it was behind this piece of terrain, and I moved mine back so I could hide a little bit better with it. I ended up going first on this one, 2, which is pretty nice. I took some different secondaries. I didn't want to be relying on Warpcraft secondaries against a Thousand Suns army because they have buffs to deny. So I ended up taking Investigate Signals, which I wasn't entirely sure about, but I was like, whatever. There's an objective in the middle. Let's go for it. So being able to go first, I basically had positioned my Genestealers behind this wall, slightly out of my deployment zone. I had units screening all the way in the back here. Death Leaper is really good for that because you could just like toe on the edge of a building or something and be able to screen out an area. And then I had my little champion here, the Pyrovore, in the back corner here that was screening out this whole area from turn 1. Umbralific Crystal Drops. My opponent was Cult of Time, actually, not Cult of Duplicity, so he didn't have Sorcerer's Facade, but he did have the Crystal, so he had a once per game redeploy, and he had he was able to heal his guys with the Cult of Time. So I went up to the middle of the table on turn 1 with the Genestealers and completed 1 Investigate Sites and basically kept the rest of my army pretty safe. I put 2 warriors on this objective with Catalyst on them, and I just hoped for the best with those guys, basically. And then we said go, and my opponent, you know, essentially moved forward. He had a Zangor unit move into the middle, but didn't have too much to do. Magnus ended up basically running around this corner. You can kind of see him behind the building there, and fired a bunch of mortal wounds into the warrior squad and killed, I think, 4 of them, but wasn't able to entirely wipe the unit. So I still did score that objective and got my nice 8 points. But the Zangor unit did go in and just blow up the Genestealers. He also temporal surged a Rubric Marine squad onto this objective, and he had the rest of his Rubrics hiding behind the building over here. So basically, I believe I picked out Neurothrope Imperative for round 2, and just pushed super far out to try to clip this unit out. I ended up getting the Zone Thropes in range to do a smite. I jumped the Hive Tyrant over, did his 2 smites into them, shot a couple of guns into them, which removed some models, and I started, I had some lines of sight I could peek basically from this corner into the units in the building, and we started removing models with the Venom Cannons over there. Turns out Venom Cannons are really good against Rubric Marines, which is a little bit awkward for them because they're 2 damage, so they ignore all is dust, and they have enough AP to put them on their invulnerable save even after Armor of Contempt. So they're and they wound on 2, so they're like this perfect profile to just shoot at nice little Thousand Suns Rubric Marines, which is pretty good. I put the Pyrovore up on that objective and flamered some dudes, and then got 2 Raveners, or a couple Raveners in there as well. It wasn't the full 2. And then bounced over with the Hive Tyrant. He blew up that unit basically, and then ran away, which felt pretty good. And we called it a day. I was able to do my action with a little unit, warrior unit that was over there in the middle to get my Investigate Sites. And from there, my opponent basically counterattacked with a big unit of Scarabocult Terminators. He only had the 1 Scarabocult unit because Magnus was basically taking up the space of the... Usually you see 2, and Magnus was essentially taking up the space of the 2nd big Scarabocult brick. So 1 Scarabocult brick teleported down from Deep Strike around Magnus, which I thought was a pretty cool shot. He's like summoning his minions from the ether. He's like, come to me, my Terminator boys. They ended up laying down insane amounts of firepower, as they do, and basically clipped most of the stuff out on this objective. But I had put the remaining warriors in that squad, plus a unit of Raveners, plus Death Leaper. So basically ensuring that my opponent had to kill one of those units in the Psychic phase in order to actually clear out enough stuff to access Death Leaper. And he wasn't able to do that. He fired everything essentially into the Raveners and cleared them out. But unfortunately, what might have been a little bit of a missed target on his part was that meant that the Scarab occults could no longer declare a charge because they were too far away from everyone. But yeah, he ended up basically just removing a bunch of stuff with that unit, but Death Leaper remained holding down the objective. And unfortunately for my opponent as well, I think he had fired his rubrics here into the warriors over there. I believe that's how that shot went. And clipped out the warriors and all the gargoyles that I had in the middle. But that meant that I still had all this stuff on this objective, and he ended up failing his charge, I believe, into the Raveners, which was I think a 6, if I have to... if I remember correctly, down here on the right-hand side of the screen. Which meant that I ended up holding my opponent's objective, so I started getting 12-point turns, which was a pretty big deal. From there, I basically just I pivoted around away from the big brick of Scarab Occults and Magnus. I had my 2 little warriors that could over here, keeping things alive over there. And basically had the Hive Tyrant and a couple random warriors that had survived from like my 3-mans in the middle, as well as shooting, and the 2 Raveners over here push up into the guys that were in this area. Between the Psychic Powers and shooting and the Hive Tyrant, I was able to kill all the Rubric Marines. Then the Raveners were actually able to get into my opponent's Exalted Sorcerer and kill him in melee also. So this Ravener squad was really just like sort of wildly overperforming. They had already killed 1 rubric squad, or at least assisted in the kill of 1 rubric squad, and then survived the turn, and then killed a character as well, which is pretty wild. And this Pyrovore over here, he took a couple bolter shots, but only took 1 wound because they're T5, and ended up just holding this objective for another turn, which is pretty wild. That said, my opponent did get his Scarab Occults onto the center objective finally, and Magnus pushed into the center objective to try to clear some dudes out. I believe that all of my remaining units, basically, that were in this area got wiped out by the Scarab Occults, and Magnus ended up without a charge target. So he tried to charge into the Hive Tyrant, but it would have been like a 10, and ended up failing that charge, which would have been pretty interesting, I think. I think Magnus kills that Hive Tyrant, but I'm not 100% sure, because I can transhuman into a 4+ invuln, and I made sure to deny his Twist of Fate, so he couldn't remove my invulnerable save. So I think it would have been pretty close if Magnus had gone in there. But I did have this whole warrior squad just like waiting in the wings for Magnus to come in, so I think I could have counterpunched him down. And then from there, basically we popped the warrior imperative, and the horde descended on everyone. I put the big warrior brick, the remaining 6-man warrior brick, into the Scarab Occults, and they killed a bunch of them. A ton of dudes came into Magnus. The fight lasted him with the Venom Thropes, and then killed him with the Hive Tyrant. And my opponent was left with just a couple models on his home objective, and then we ended up basically just talking the rest of the game out. So yeah, I was unimpressed by Magnus, I think, as most people would not be too shocked about, because his updated datasheet is very sad. Poor guy. But ended up taking that win down pretty convincingly, and that put me into a final game. This one was against Chaos Knights, so we got both flavors of Knights this time around. I'll take a quick sip there. Now, this game the terrain was a little funky once again for this game. As we were on Recover the Relics, so we had 3 relics in each of our table halves, and in order to score victory points, you have to be towing on the relic at the start of the turn. You have to be controlling it at the start of the turn. One of the center objectives, one of these square of objectives in the middle. You also had the short table edge deployment, so we had kind of a long rush distance. And as you can see, my opponent played very cagey with his army. He kept his entire army in a little ingot in the back of his deployment zone, which kept it very safe for me early. Now, I did have a couple things that kind of went my way here. You can't quite see her, but I have Death Leaper over here on this objective, because there was dense cover on that objective, so as long as she towed into the terrain, she was untargetable by ranged attacks. And that ended up meaning that I could just forget about that objective for the entirety of the game, which was awesome. And basically, in order to score my 8 points, because this is a hold 2 to score 8, I ended up basically just focusing on these 2 objectives. And Death Leaper was instrumental in holding down this one in the back, and then the rest of the army could hold this one down pretty effectively too. So I was feeling pretty good. I just fed one like inconsequential unit into that objective every turn, so my opponent didn't get a 12, and we basically just played out the attrition game. This time my opponent had an Abominant, but I still felt like I was okay taking Psychic Secondaries. So I ended up taking Psychic Interrogation because I kind of like it against Knights because typically the only characters are the big Knights, and if my opponent, assuming that, especially for Chaos Knights, and assuming the, depending on what the loadout of the big Knights end up being, if they have to stay out of range of Psychic Interrogation, it ends up being pretty bad for them because they're basically not contributing for the entirety of the game, unless they're a big gunboat, which the Chaos Knights don't tend to be. So I felt pretty good about that pick. I also took Bring It Down, which is pretty solid, and my last pick ended up being Retrieve Nachmund data. I've been burned by, despite the fact that this is the best mission for Raise the Banners High, I've been burned by Raise the Banners High in the past, especially against Chaos Knights, because there's so many Armigers, and the Armigers are all relatively fast, especially because my opponent was playing a Demonic Household, so he could pump for additional movement. So they could push 15 inches up the table, and because my army is so low on OBSEC, basically all my opponent needs to do is tow one Armiger onto each of the objectives, and it breaks my banner. So I don't have to worry about that quite so much for in the updated edition, but I certainly do this time around. And I ended up not taking banners. I ended up taking Retrieve Nachmund data, which at the end of the day worked out pretty well. My opponent took the Chaos Knight secondary to perform actions on the objectives. He took a nice Stranglehold, and he took no prisoners, as everyone does against my army of 2 million wounds of infantry on the table. Basically, like the last game, I ended up playing super cagey on my first turn. I ended up going first again, and I also didn't take enough pictures of this game, so I'm just basically... We're gonna have to do a little theater of the mind's eye, I think, today, because I I don't have enough pictures to illustrate everything that happened. But essentially, this is after my first turn, so in order to hide my models, I basically had this solid piece of terrain that could hide a little bit. So I had a couple units behind it because it was obscuring, and then a couple units inside the ruins in here. I had this piece of terrain that could hide relatively effectively, and then I had this one, which was really good. I could block lots of lines of sight with the obscuring, and then I could also put some models farther forward to block with the true line of sight blocking walls. The awkward part was that I didn't have anything like in the center of the table. So again, I couldn't really push past like this area without losing a ton of my army to shooting. So I ended up basically not moving too much on the first turn. I just kept models in the front that were untargetable. I had the Prime over here. I had the Hive Tyrant over here. Death Leaper was in the corner like we talked about. And I essentially just said go. I think I took a single attack with Tyranid Prime. And then that was it. That was my whole first turn. So I seeded Psychic Interrogation because my opponent deployed so far back. And I got one Retrieve Nachmund data, I think, with these gargoyles over here. My opponent ended up moving pretty aggressively with the Abominant. He had the Abominant in his bottom right-hand corner. But the rest of his army stayed back. He had the... this is a Desecrator, move up onto another objective to do an action. He got some Armigers around the sides. He had all range Armigers. So he had Brigands, a brace of Brigands, so Chain Gun and Melta, and then he had 3 Helverins as well, or the, are they called Reapers? Whatever the Helverin equivalent for War Dogs is. So his Armigers weren't doing too much in melee, but they were putting down pretty lethal firepower if they could ever get line of sight to anything. And my entire army is really good profiles to be shot at by Chaos Knights, which does mean that like I take a lot of additional damage from him. So I didn't take too many casualties in the first turn, which was good. But I didn't really have too much like table presence. So what I ended up doing was supercharging my Warrior Brick over here, doing a big advance into the Abominant, who was standing over here. I procced the Prime Imperative to explode all of my 6s to hit with shooting, and just basically I peeked out a couple of Ravener units. I had the whole Warrior Brick over here and just fired everything into this Abominant and did a little bit of damage to it. Then the Warriors charged. He did -1 damage the Warriors in melee because of course you would, because they're 2 damage models, and ended up eating the charge, and I think got brought pretty low. He was down to 4 or 5 wounds at the end of all that fighting, which I was pretty happy with, to be fair. But that did mean that the Warriors got vaporized. and the Abominant actually ended up just falling back forward and going for a charge on my Gene Stealers, who are right here. So he charged into the Gene Stealers, ended up piling, consolidating into my Zoanthropes and the Hive Tyrant. And I was like warning my opponent, I was like, well, Hive Tyrant's just going to murder you if you do that. And he did have Infernal Quest in that guy, so he was objective secured. So he was stealing the objective away from me. But he ended up just piling in and touching the Hive Tyrant in order to auto-explode on my army. And did a bunch of damage to the Hive Tyrant. I think hit him for 5 mortal wounds. And he killed the entire Gene Stealer squad and some other models. But it wasn't like the most impactful thing. And I actually think it would have been more deleterious for me for that guy to survive and just sit on that objective and take it from me. But I ended up being able to get the Abominant that way. The Hive Tyrant went up and basically just started peeling Arbigers off this objective and then running away every turn. And I ended up, when I went for a Warrior Imperative and just flung my Warriors out into the Desecrator that was over here. Or excuse me, into 2 War Dogs, or War Dogs that were over on this side. The Desecrator was the only model touching the objective, which meant that the charge and pile and consolidate let me put a warrior on this objective and tow it for my opponent to block my opponent down to 1 objective, because the Hive Tyrant was killing everybody on this objective. So that ended up going pretty well. I started encircling my units to get retrieve Nachmund data. So I got this on round 1. The Gene Stealers got this on round 2, and then I encircled the Gargoyles. They dropped down into the back corner over here on round 3 to encircle, and then the last turn of the game I actually encircled one of the Ravener bricks that was hiding in the back, and they encircled back here to get my last retrieve Nachmund data. So that ended up working out pretty well. I maxed out the retrieve Nachmund, but I essentially I was just sending all my dudes directly to their doom. I eventually, between the Hive Tyrant and the brave sacrifice of the warriors over here, I was able to finally kill all of the War Dogs. The Abominant was already dead, so my opponent was left with mostly just the Desecrator. I think he had 2 autocannon War Dogs that were hiding in the back here, but he ended up with basically not enough to be able to move up and contest the objectives. To be fair, after my encircles, I was down to, I think, literally just like my Venom Thropes and Zone Thropes and Tyrant Guard and the Hive Tyrant. Although in the last turn of the game, the Hive Tyrant hilariously pushed up to kill an Armiger, killed the Armiger, which exploded, and bracketed the Tyrant, so he wasn't able to get back behind his Tyrant Guard, and so ended up being the closest unit to 2 autocannon Armigers and killed him, which is I think the funniest way I've lost a Hive Tyrant so far. Is just have 2 things explode on him and and lose enough mortal wounds to for that to cripple him, but certainly worth it, because he ended up killing like 4 Armigers over the course of the game. But that ended up with a pretty close. It was grab the final score here. It was Recover the Relics, which tends to be a pretty high scoring game. But it ended up being a pretty close score, which was 89-78 to me at the end. But because I was able to complete my Retrieve Nachmund, I got 4 points on Psychic Interrogation, if I remember correctly, with the Hive Tyrant, and then just asking the Desecrator questions every turn. And then I got a big score on Bring It Down, because I was able to kill most of my opponent's army. And my opponent wasn't really able to get Stranglehold too many times. He ended up losing enough board presence that he ended up starting to lose points on that. And he wasn't quite able to get enough objectives with his the Chaos Knight as special action. He got his own home of 3 objectives with the action, but he wasn't able to score any on my side. I think that feels like it ends up being kind of a win more secondary, because you end up completing it after you kill all your opponent's models. So I'm not entirely sure about that one, but to be fair, there aren't too many other options for Chaos Knights, at least right now. Once they can start stacking the multiple faction secondaries, I think they're going to be in a much better place in Warzone Nephilim. But today, not today. Today is not that day. But anyway, that put me at 2-1. I had my loss was very big, because it was only a 1-point loss, and my wins were pretty okay. So I ended up with 5th place out of the pool. Certainly would have liked to have done better, but there's not too much I can do about that, because my first round unfortunately went so south, which is too bad. But it is what it is, and I was pretty pretty happy with how I ended up. And my first round opponent, Dylan, actually ended up going 3-0 with his Imperial Knight. So you can't be too upset about losing to one of the people who went undefeated over the course of the event. So that's okay. But that ended up being my whole tournament. So yeah, that was pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the High Fleet Kraken list. I think I'll stick with it through Nachmund, or through Nephilim, excuse me. I've been playing a couple games with it with the rumored points changes. It loses about 160 points if all the changes are correct, because the Warriors and the Raveners all pump up 5 points. I ended up cutting the Pyrovore, and I cut one of the Ravener bricks, essentially, for some upgrades, which I think is fine. I haven't really felt like I've been missing too much so far. Although, realistically, I do wonder if it's worth like trying to cut points and find a place for a like a Sky Slasher unit instead of the Pyrovore. I don't know. I almost would like to be able to get another big monster in the list instead of all of the infantry, because the downside right now is it gives up really easy points and no prisoners. And one thing that might happen in Warzone Nephilim is as the really easy generic secondaries get removed, you end up valuing any secondaries that you can max by killing your opponent's models even more and more heavily. And I think no prisoners being maxable in my list is a pretty big deal. Pyrovore MVP? Maybe. He actually was like he was super sick this entire day. I think this game he did the least, but he was actually the size of this crate actually hid him perfectly, which is kind of funny. So he survived like 3 turns just standing there, and then 1 turn ran over and scored this objective and then got blown up. But the last game, he stood on this objective for the entirety of the game. I don't believe he ever died. And the game before that against Imperial Knights, he ended up holding this objective. Yeah, also for the entire game, actually. He survived the whole game, both times. Pyrovore might have been MVP, chat. That guy's so good. Maybe I don't. Maybe I can't cut the Pyrovore. Maybe I'm too invested now. Turns out a T5 like 3+ save dude is pretty good if your opponent has to dedicate attacks to him. I don't know what else in the game is T5 3-up save with 5 wins. It's such a weird profile to shoot at. I don't know. I guess we'll see what the final points look like for him. I think if the Pyrovores go up 10 or 5 points, I feel like they're super easy to justify in lists still. If they go up 10, it's a little bit harder to justify like the one-off Pyrovore. But I mean, they are so good. So he also just like does damage randomly. He plowed a Imperial Knight in my first game for like 4 damage. I think he just flamered it and was like, I don't know, take two converted attacks, 2 damage each, take 4. 1/6 of your hit points gone by this 30-point idiot who like randomly has a gun he doesn't even need. Super good. Yeah, super awesome. All right, chat. Well, we can also talk about some lists from this past weekend. How's that sound? I am looking forward to Tyranids in the post Nachmund world, I think, because I think that Nephilim is going to be a little bit of a kick in the pants for them. Probably not as hard as maybe they should get, but it will certainly be an impact. Tyranids are really good at Stranglehold, and I think losing Stranglehold is kind of a big deal for them, because the whole Tyranid game plan is trading units over the middle, and that's the entire game plan about playing Stranglehold. But to be fair, everyone else likes Stranglehold too, so I don't know how much that'll hit them. Plus, like, they're gonna get points cuts and stuff. So, and I think that the Tyranid secondary, like faction secondaries, are okay, but they probably have one of the worst suites of faction secondaries in the game. So, although looking at the Adeptus Mechanicus spoilers, I was a little bit like, oh boy. Those secondaries haven't changed at all. They were already bad, and now they're even worse somehow. I don't know how they manage that. Or they're not worse. They're better, but they're like they haven't been updated quite enough, I think. All right, let's talk about some lists, chat. I think there's some interesting ones that I want to talk about. I think one of my favorite, we can kind of rip the Band-Aid off real quick here, is Dominique Carret's list from Canada, Canadian Shield. Partly because I also saw this list getting played in my RTT this weekend, and I was very impressed by it. So this is basically like, it's like Knight Tribal, kind of, which is kind of cool. It's sort of a Knight soup list. And that's because it soups Grey Knights with Imperial Knights. So it's two different kinds of Knights, both of which are different factions. But because we have the... let me just flip this over a little bit. There it is. Because we have the Agent of the Imperium rule for Imperial Knights, you can take this Armiger squad in your Grey Knights army and you don't lose your Tides of the Warp. And that's like a pretty big deal, because the one thing that Grey Knights have very little of is long range, like effective shooting, and like Armigers just do that easy peasy. Plus, Armigers like benefit from having good command point economy, and if you play Prescient Brethren, you can do the action. Although we were in Preservers this time around, you can do the action to get command points back, but. The Armigers just like standing around in the back and shooting people is really good. They're hard to interact with because their guns are the range in their guns are so long. They have a 1 CP strat to get Genron Might on all of them. They all get 6s to hit auto wound, which is super solid. And the one thing that I was sort of unprepared for was the impact of the extra AP pip that the auto cannons got. So their strengths have an AP 3 damage, 2d3 shots per auto cannon. So they average 8 per Armiger, and for 500 points, like that's good value. So I was impressed by this loadout here. Effectively, it takes a couple Dread Knights, I believe. Sometimes we saw 2 Dread Knights in heavy support, but it looks like we got a Rhino to ferry interceptors around, 1 big Paladin squad, which is friggin' sick, and a Grandmaster Nemesis Dread Knight to follow things up, who has, I assume, Sigil of Exigence, and does he not have Servant of the Throne? Oh! Did I miss it? No. So Shield of Humanity is... no, Shield of Humanity is the upgrade CP. I guess he's not a Servant of the Throne. Whoa, that's spicy. That's a spicy meatball right there. Incredible. But and then first to the fray for the charge buff, and then a big Paladin squad. Okay, cool, fair enough. All right, sounds good. What site am I using? You always use it. I always use it. Need to bookmark it. Yeah, here we go. I'll put it in the chat there, everybody. I also want to give a shout out to Dominique, because they are a T5S2 player, so they are a Tactical Tortoise community member. So you can hang out with them in the Discord with everybody. Exclamation point Discord in the chat if you want to come hang out with us. I did just I was very excited about myself. I put I figured out you could put emojis in the channel names for the Discord, so the Discord is much more colorful than it was this time last week. Pretty happy with it. I think it looks pretty good. Best in Tabletop Open, we saw some interesting finalists. And I think one thing that my takeaway here was for the sort of holistically this week was that our top 5s looked pretty diverse. And I know that's somehow kind of a controversial statement, because there are still like Tyranids sort of dominating things. Tyranids and Eldar are still undisputedly the number 1 and number 2 factions for sure. But other factions are slowly starting to creep up. Like we do have this mixed Imperium. We have Adeptus Custodes, Tau. Tyranids didn't get into the top 5 this event until 5th. Best in Tabletop Open was won by Tyranids, but we saw 3 separate factions in the remainder of the top 5 here. Deckbach Master. We also have Jonathan B from the server over here going 4-1 in this one with Eldari. That one also won by Tyranids and Grey Knights. Nice to see Grey Knights getting some work done. We had Chris Kinnair, another Tactical Tortoise community member, playing Necrons to a 4-1. This is a relentlessly expansionist Eternal Conquerors build. with... This is Outrider plus Patrol. So we're just... I think this has been termed the OBSEC build, but OBSEC was like KH, like it's the Necron spelling. It's bringing Scorpion Destroyers, Transcendent Catan, a bunch of Canoptic Wraiths and Scarabs, which you would expect in the OBSEC build. A bunch of Tomb Blades, which are pretty, I think, underrated for OBSEC units because they're wildly fast. Although they don't hit very hard and they're kind of easy to kill. There are only 2 wounds, unfortunately, on those guys. 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers, not individuals, interestingly. I guess that's just so that we have more efficient use of the reroll strat for the Locusts. And I guess for Solar Pulse too. But I do like the individual Locust Heavy Destroyers if you have space for them. 1 Catacomb Command Barge, maybe to unlock the Code of Combat, although usually you want that for Silent King. As well as another unit of Scorpex, a double Scorpex, another unit of Scarab Swarms, another Transcendent Catan. So this is kind of a what's the word? Hybrid between the normal OBSEC list, which is a lot of fast units like the Wraiths and the Scarab Swarms, and the Transcendent Catan list, which is oftentimes 3 Transcendent Catan. Unfortunately, that list is probably going to go by the wayside with the new Nephilim changes. And I think this list may as well kind of be gone. Although, if there's any faction that can use multiple detachments, it's probably Necrons, because they don't do anything with their command points. And especially if they have Silent King, he refunds them command points, but they like already don't really have a ton of... They have almost no... Excuse me. Wow, got a bug in my throat there. They have almost no pregame selections to pick. So they only spend their CP during the game, and they still don't have too much to do with it. So like you can, the destroyers are kind of a command point sink, which is nice. As well as the characters in the Transcendent Catan. But other than that, you're not really doing too much with your command points. So this list could actually survive, I think, the Nephilim change. Dylan Usher in there, another Tactical Tortoise community member, and I'm actually playing Dylan in a pod finals on Friday. So that'll be fun. Congratulations to him for the 4-1. We did see Hellstorm Wargaming. Shout out to them. Running another Hellstorm GT. And it looks like won by Chaos Space Marines. Word Bearers. And not even Sorceress Word Bearers. So we get access to the hexagrammic... or the Dark Pact. What is it? The automatically cast spell. We're just doing regular Word Bearer stuff. Interesting. Wow, what a wild list. This is insane. I couldn't tell you what the secret technology behind this list is because I'm not entirely sure what Word Bearers do. I know I was just looking at them the other day to compare them to the updated Word Bearers sub-action ability, which is wild in the new codex. It's full rerolls to hit on first round of combat, which is crazy. But the old Word Bearers look different. Take a quick look at their stratagems real quick. Guess we could put it in the viewer. There it is. Yeah, so they have Dark Pact. That's to summon demons. It's Malevolent Covenant to autocast spells, but there's no Psychers. Oh, there's a Demon Prince, of course, with Warp Time. So we can autocast the spells on the Demon Prince. All right. That makes sense. I like that. You can 1 CP auto pass and save on a character. And otherwise you get a bonus against Ultramarines. Alright. I couldn't entirely tell you why this list is Word Bearers, but the auto cast warp time is a pretty big deal for sure. Definitely. Most armies can run 2 patrols at 2,000 points. Yeah, but the problem isn't the points cost. The problem is the command points cost. Because in the updated... Most armies are going to spend probably 4 points pre-game if they want 2 relics and 2 warlord traits. And then if you buy a second patrol, that's all of your starting CP. So you have to be a faction that doesn't have that same level of pregame phase spend, which I think Necrons are. I think a lot of times Necrons are going to be like, I will take Veil of Darkness. That's it. That's all I need. Like maybe you get like an Orb of Eternity or something. But you very rarely spend more than 1 CP pregame, and then you can spend the rest of it on new detachments and stuff like that. You'll be fine. But anyway, this is a wild list. Well, congratulations to Joel Henry for going 4-1 at Hellstorm's Tempest GT. Although this is, I guess it was a Tempest event, so it wasn't necessarily GT, right? And it was lower player count. I think it was only like 26 people instead of 28, which is normally the cutoff for GTs. We considered to see the top cuts for these big UK events be basically the definition of the metagame, and I think that's indicative of the fact that these events tend to be very large and cut undefeated players, but not like before final round. So you end up just cutting to the people with the highest score, which tend to be the people playing the strongest army. So it's not that surprising. We did see Feast of Blades over here with some really cool finishes. This is an interesting one because I think it was a 6-round event, but didn't have enough players to go the full 6, which I think is 64, is what you need to go to 6 rounds with 1 undefeated. So we probably had to play multiple rounds being the only undefeated for Dusty over here at the top. And this is not the first time we've seen Dusty at an X and O with Drukhari. So really showing off the new Army of Renown. We have a 60 racks, another 60 racks, so 120 racks, 130 racks, 2 units of 5 Incubi, 2 units of 5 Grotesques. That is a beatstick of a list. The old gear check. Can you kill 130 racks and 10 Grotesques? If no, you lose. And it looks like nobody was able to do it. So Dusty with the 6-0. We also saw Necrons at 4-1-1. This is another Obsec Dynasty. And this is, I think, more of a classic Obsec list. We do have Silent King in there. Hey, here he is. So Code of Combat is online. We have a 1 big brick of Necron Warriors with a Reanimator next to them and a Resurrection Orb, but no Orb of Eternity, it looks like. Yeah, just the regular Res Orb. Save us off a CP that way, whatever. But we do have a Technomancer who can heal those guys. So the Technomancer can respawn dudes, and then the Res Orb can respawn dudes. And a Chronomancer to give them the invulnerable save. The rest of the army mostly has an invulnerable save already, because it's... Oh, I guess it's only 2 units of Canoptic Wraiths. So 2 units of Wraiths, 2 units of Scarabs, 1 Scorpec, 1 Ophidian. But benefit of these guys is that they can Deep Strike innately. So you can kind of reach out and touch people with those dudes. They perform actions pretty well, because they can Deep Strike and then just... If there's 6 models in the unit, they just do retrieve Nachmund data for free. I've seen that. It's very expensive for them, but it's nice to have. And then we also see the Locust Heavy Destroyer. That's a CP sync over here too. Yeah, this is what I would feel. I would sort of feel is a classic Necron list. But I think this style of list is always going to be relatively good. And if we see, I think the secondary objective changes are going to be really good for Necrons. And if we see points cuts for Necrons at all, the faction could actually become very competitive very quickly. So congratulations to Rob Goosens for 4-1-1 finish there. We saw 1,000 Suns in the top 5. Because this went 6 rounds, we got some interesting other entries in the top 5. Looks like we got a Slaanesh list and a Black Templars list. But because they didn't play to 1 undefeated, the players we get more X and 2s in the top 5 than we normally would. It's an interesting list. Is this a Be'lakor Army of Renown? No, because it's Emperor's Children. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. I do like the Emperor's Children list, though. We have a Grimaldus list at this other 4 and 2. 2 Eliminator squads. And a Vanguard with Helbrecht, 1 Assault Centurion squad, 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts. Is there an Aurelian Shroud in this list? Oh, that doesn't affect the Dreadnoughts anymore, though, I don't believe. It's infantry only. I think from there, the only other interesting result we saw today is another Dark Angels X and 1 from Sasha Edelkraut. This is from Maryland Open, and he played Ravenwing generally. So a lot of times we're seeing like a hybrid Ravenwing Deathwing, but this one is 100% Ravenwing, and we're seeing more and more breakout results from Dark Angels with these Ravenwing units, which is pretty cool. So we have a Outrider with a Champion who's been upgraded as a real beat stick. He's a Reliquary of the Repentant, which I believe caps invulnerable saves within 3 inches of it, and then Imperium Sword for the +1 strength and attack, and then 2 Talon Masters, which are probably kind of back into the... They might be back in now that we have changes to sort of the meta, because the high volume strength 5 and strength 6 is very good against Tyranids, and it's very good against Eldar, which are the top 2 factions. The downside is that it's hard to get shots against Eldar, and you can get kind of boned by mortal wounds and stuff on those Talon Masters if Eldar build correctly. But, I mean, they're so fast that it's kind of up to you to put them in harm's way in the first place, so it's not that big of a deal. But I think, like, playing Tyranids, I think I would be fucking terrified of a Talon Master. I have, like, no response to that guy. So, 2 of them makes total sense. 2 of them and Samael to give rerolls for Ravenwing units. We have 1 big Black Knight squad, which I like, just as kind of a big hammer unit. 1 bike squad with an attack bike to be an OBSEC unit, because they do get objectives secured in Ravenwing detachments, and then a ton of Landspeeders. So 2 Landspeeder Vengeances, 3 Stormspeeder Thunderstrikes, 2 Dark Talons, which are the aircraft, with the Mortal Wound Gun. Super cool. The triple Stormspeeder list coming out of like nowhere to be good in Ravenwing. I mean, it makes total sense, but it definitely has surprised me, because I was very dismissive of the Stormspeeders when they came out. But to be fair, when they came out, they were like 180 points, and now they've dropped significantly in the interim time. So it makes a lot more sense that we'd be seeing those guys doing pretty well. I guess we can take a quick look at what Tyranids are doing right now. I think it's mostly Leviathan still, yeah. Look at that, Leviathan Warriors. Only 1 Harpy this time. Amazing. What's this one? Ooh, it's Kraken. This one is Kraken with a Swarmlord. All right. This list is one after my own heart, given that I basically played it this weekend. It's 1 Neurothrop, 1 Winged Hive Tyrant. It's a single 5-man warrior brick, and then 3 5-man Raveners. 2 of 5, 1 of 4. The 2 Biovores are okay for like for movement blocking, and especially if you're worried about Knights. I think Knights get like low-key kind of fucked by Biovores, because they can walk over you and through your engagement range as long as they end over it, but their bases are so big you can take up their final position, so you can stop them from being able to stand on objectives. And then if you play such that like they can't get on an objective, and if they get too close you explode and they can't charge you anyway. So there's a lot of matchups I think the Biovores are going to be pretty good at. They're also interestingly kind of good against other Tyranid players, especially if they're not focused on flying units, because you can't cross their engagement range unless you can move over them. So like unless you fly essentially. So you can make movement for ground-based melee stuff really hard to accomplish, essentially. And then Swarmlord. I do love Swarmlord with the Ravener bricks, though. Swarmlord like supercharges the supercharge that we already see, and we do have a direct guidance on the Winged Hive Tyrant. So you can put for the buffs from one of the Winged Hive Tyrant all on 1 unit, and then the Swarmlord buff on another unit, and you basically have full rerolls on 2 units, because one of them is hitting on 2s, rerolling 1s, and the other one is hitting on 3s, rerolling everything. So you have 2 units that are kind of supercharged, although there's no reroll 1s to wound in this list. Yeah, I don't hate this list at all. I know I streamed a couple of games, especially with William York, who loves Swarmlord, and he played a very similar version. I think that's really strong. Tech Masters was won by Leviathan. How many harpies? 1 harpy. This one had Tyrannifex in it. That's fun. The Rupture Cannon. And Voracious Ammo. That's kind of cute. Although I did see a rumor that Exocrines were going up a ridiculous number of points, and I hope that that's not the case. They certainly do not deserve that. But yeah. Anyway, I think those are all the lists from this weekend. Do you have Adeptus Custodes here? Mark Wang, 4-0-1 with Adeptus Custodes. Pretty solid. It's a solid finish. 3 units of Sagittarium, 1 unit of Custodian Guard, 3 units of Virtus Praetors. What a classic Custodes list. Basically, like, this man went to sleep in January and then, like, woke up today and was like, I'm not going to change my list. No changes. Thank you. I will retain the same list. That's nice to see that's still doing okay. I think Custodes are like, they're like 1 tweak away from being good. If they get no changes in Nephilim and the top of the metagame is reduced significantly, I think Custodes will be in a strong place. But the problem is I feel like the dial was turned too far with their nerfs. And I feel like it might have been that they, like, the longer a faction is overpowered, it feels like the harder they get nerfed. And Custodes being dominant for, like, basically 5 straight months was really, I think, grating on people. So they got hit way too hard. But they shouldn't, in my opinion, they shouldn't have lost objective security on their characters. I think that was, like, the defining trait of the army, and losing it meant that they sort of just sucked at holding objectives forever. Anyway, that's gonna be it for me today, chat. I'll go ahead and pop things up. And thanks everyone for coming out and hanging out with me. I'll be live all week with gameplay over on the Twitch channel. So if you are over on there, I've got tomorrow, I'm going to be doing some Nephilim gaming. I might also play Nephilim on Thursday, but at the very least, Thursday evening, it's going to be about 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a pod finals happening. That's a Sororitas mirror, which I think will be really interesting and cool. And otherwise, I am playing in a pod finals myself over on Friday. So yeah, lots of cool stuff happening on T5S2 as well, because we are rounding out to the end of the season at the end of this month. So we are going to be pulling the top 16 for the Invitational in July, which will be great. And I think everyone's very excited for that. So anyway, good stuff. One question. All right, Artemis Steve, you get one question. What is the question? Is the old rules people get wrong I did a year ago? I don't know what that means. So, I'm sorry. Like, is what, I don't, yeah. I literally just don't understand the question. Sorry, Artemis Steve. All right, I'm going to go ahead and sign things out. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and I will talk to you later. Come hang out with me on the Twitch channel.